I'm going to welcome you today. My name is Christa Eidsness. I am the head of the Conservatory of Performing Arts at the University of Regina. Part of what we do at the University of Regina is acknowledge that we are not the first people to ever live or make music or create art in this place. And so want to just acknowledge that the University of Regina is situated on the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis-Michif Nation. And the University of Regina is on Treaty 4 land with a presence also on Treaty 6. So our guest today, yay, is Anna Norris. She is, do you say bassoonist or do you just say bassoon? Yeah, okay. She's the principal bassoonist of the RSO, the Regina Symphony Orchestra. And Anna, I'm going to throw it to you. Do you want to say maybe a couple things about yourself? To say, we know you're in Regina. We know you're relatively new to Regina. I don't think you've been here more than 5 years yet, right?
Yeah, time seems to have worked. I have played 3 seasons, I think, maybe 4 seasons. I don't know how many seasons. Yeah, not more than 5 sounds about right.
Okay.
with the RSO and the RSCP. Yeah. Okay. I'm from Toronto originally and mostly was in various places around Ontario before coming to Regina.
Come here. Awesome. So I'm going to start, you know, I used to start with what do you listen to or what's on your playlist? And what I've discovered is that lots of us who are musicians don't do a lot of listening to music. Sometimes we do, but sometimes not. So I will ask, what do you listen to if you're in the car? Or do you have a favorite piece that you've played? One or the other, or both.
Okay. Well, if I'm in the car, usually I tend to try to keep the radio on the I don't actually know what the 2 stations are called. There's 2 French CBC stations that are like Radio 1 and Radio 2, and there's one that's primarily music, but there's also quite a lot of talking, and that's kind of my only the only time I really hear a lot of French. So I tend to keep the radio on one of the French CBC stations, and I do really like actually a lot of the music choices that they make. It's somewhat parallel to the English programming, I think, in that they have a mix of classical music and of rock and pop and indie kind of music during the day. But it's usually things that I haven't heard before. I tend to be, the way that I kind of absorb music into my consciousness is that it kind of happens slowly, but I tend to get very stuck on a loop almost of like one song, like it's something that's like 5 minutes or so playing over and over again until it runs out. So I was prepared for this question. I went and looked in my Spotify, which I wasn't gonna hop on the streaming bandwagon, but my younger brother got a family Spotify subscription as a Christmas gift that my parents and I are on. So unfortunately, I can actually see exactly how many times I've played each thing that I get stuck on. And so, I mean, like for instance, recently on a car trip, I decided I'm going to listen to the St. Matthew Passion, which I hadn't, I mean, I've probably heard it before, but not listened to it systematically, which worked great until I got to this one particular aria towards the end, Gebt mir meinem Jesum wieder. And it's a bass aria. And I think I had like two or 3 more hours left before I got home on this car trip. And I ended up listening to this one aria on loop for like those 3 hours. But that tends to happen to me a lot. And I can kind of go back through my record of like things that I know really, really well. So let's see, like recent tunes that I know really, really well. I wrote a program note about a composer, one of the composers in the court of Frederick the Great named János, I think. And so I ended up looking up some of the lesser known music from that court and ended up listening to Grand's opera, Cesare Cleopatra, particularly an aria that goes Voglio strage e sangue voglio. I want a massacre. I want blood. That has been on loop in my brain recently. If that makes you feel any better. I've been listening over and over to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds cover of the seldom seen song Muddy Water, David Bowie's Wild as the Wind, and the aria from Dr. Atomic on John Donne's Holy Sonnet 14 has been actually I've heard a few different versions of that instrumental and sung for a few years, and that has been on my mind a lot. So there's what I have been.
That's awesome. I'm just gonna say, because I heard you mention a lot of choral and opera, and I thought, you're not a choral singer or an opera singer, you're a bassoonist. So you clearly don't listen to just bassoon music, right?
Do I listen? I have to say I probably haven't listened to very much bassoon music since I was in school. I mean, sometimes there's just not a huge amount of that's not fair. It wouldn't be fair to say there's not a huge amount of variety compared to, you know, all of the other things in the world that there are to listen to. Proportionally, most of it is not bassoon music. I do really love a lot of the recordings that the bassoonist Dag Jensen has made a lot of really imaginative, wonderful recordings, and I listened to his version of like the stuff that I played for some of the stuff that I've played for recitals. I chose off of his recordings, and I remember listening to his recording of the Sonatine for Bassoon by Marcel Biche, which is one of my favorite pieces. It's also incredibly difficult, but that was something that I remember, like when I was in school, I would like put it on loud and like run around my room going, yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah,
Okay,
I have to say I probably don't get bassoon music. Although Hyunsik sent me a piece the other day, our clarinetist sent me this piece called the Baboon Concerto, and she told me about it in rehearsal, and I thought, oh, that sounds silly, but it was really brilliant. So there's a piece of bassoon music that I've listened to recently, the Baboon Concerto by Frederick Hobig, maybe? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
I'm guessing that if we Google the Baboon Concerto, there'd only be one.
Yeah, the full thing is on YouTube. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, so I know this is a huge, it's a huge question. It's almost unfair to start with it, but you did have the questions ahead of time. So I'm gonna add, so part of what I've already heard from you is it sounds like you like music that really touches the soul or your heart or evokes an emotional some kind of reaction. So I'm gonna ask what music means to you.
Well, I think there's always kind of a tension in terms of like what music as an art form means to me, or probably anyone, in that there's a tension, I think, between music as an art form and music as a athletic pursuit, or maybe athletic isn't quite the right term, but as an avenue of personal development or an avenue of problem solving. And I think particularly when you're a student, the part of music, you know, obviously when you're a student, you're really focused on improving and getting better. You're frequently thrown into situations that you're not good enough for. And so I think it's really easy, at least it was for me, for it to become almost like a competitive pursuit, and, you know, something that I do to get better at it because I want to prove I can, because I want to, you know, show what I can do, because I want to be able to do things that I couldn't do before, and because I want to do them better than other people. And especially when you're in music school and you're doing auditions, the idea of doing something better than someone else is extremely appealing. And, you know, I went to a relatively large music school where, you know, the first day you arrive and you do the audition, and then you're a first year, so you're not very good. So this list goes up on the wall with all the ensembles, and your name is right at the bottom. And you say, okay, well, by the time I get out of here, I want to be at the top, which is very, I think it's useful. It was useful for me. It was fun in a way for me to have that kind of, you know where you stand. Every semester there's an audition, and if your name moves up, then you're doing great. And that probably, I think, continues into the working world, and the way that musicians get jobs is by audition. We refer to winning a job instead of getting a job, which is fine. And I think that whatever that says about I think that does kind of like feed something in me to have avenues of competitive pursuit and kind of just music as personal development. But I guess the question that raises, at least for me, is like, well, all of this is kind of just ego driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like even the idea of improving at something for your own sake is really just, I think it can get to a point where it's just kind of masturbatory. Like, what's the point if I'm getting better? Okay, great, that's great for me. Is that art, right? Like, does that have anything to do with what I think most of us would state as the aim of music, which is to be a form of art, to connect people, to express emotion, to, if we're getting really ambitious, to create change in society. And I think all of the ways in which it's easy to approach music as a student, and which I find it really easy to approach music for myself, like, don't have a lot to do with that. So I don't know if that's a good answer to that question. I think it's the tension that I always feel, that I don't really know what I'm doing it for at all points.
It is an interesting answer to me, because you're right. That's how we have our education model set up, is the competition model. And in orchestras, obviously you compete for a job. But I work with someone who's a visual artist and always talks about art. And I came through the school system and then I left music. And I really struggle with calling music art, because I didn't ever get to that place where I was creating art to showcase. And so it's an interesting tension, because I hadn't thought about it that way before. It is very interesting to think about. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you say that you never got to the level where you were creating music as art, because I think that's something that is an idea that I think exists within like the teaching culture of classical music. Mm-hmm. That and to some extent it's true, right? I mean, like, if you can't control what your fingers and your lungs and your embouchure or whatever are doing, I mean, it doesn't matter if you have the best intentions in the world or the best idea in your head of what it's going to sound like. It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit of a weird model, and maybe not entirely accurate to like how art is made. This idea that like first you have to get to this technical level, and then you can start thinking about like, what's the point of this? Which is unfortunate. Like, first on the level of like, okay, well, if you get to that level and then you decide there's no point, you've wasted all your time. But also in the sense that I don't think it really works like that. That suddenly, as when you've been studying this for like a decade or so, suddenly you start having all of these ideas about art and self-expression. If you haven't been practicing doing that, like, where are those going to come from? And I remember reading, there's a really excellent, I'm not a band teacher, so I haven't looked into it that far. I've just kind of read the supplementary materials, but there's a method book, I think you could call it a method book, called The Habits of Musicianship, for band, which has some, I mean, I wouldn't say it's like, it sounds very trivial when you just say it out loud, but the central premise of this method book is that when you start someone on an instrument, you want to start out from the very beginning, teaching them that the purpose of this is to have an intention in your mind and then execute it on the instrument, and that you can do that at any level. It doesn't matter, whether or not you have all of the skills that make up a professional skill set. If the skill set you have is playing 3 notes, then the habit of being a musical player means knowing what you want to do and having a clear picture, and then doing it, and then comparing what you actually did against what you meant to do, and comparing what you meant to do against you know, what ideally you could do, and that is what musicianship is. It doesn't really matter whether you suck at the instrument or not. You can always at least pick up.
That's interesting. I again, I really appreciate the idea, because as you're saying, like, you talking about art, like I thought, well, actually maybe I would call what I did folk art, because it was not like I wasn't being professionally paid, right? And so it's an interesting distinction, because I don't know that. Anyway, I will leave that, because that's more of a me thing. But anyway, so I will go back and I'll ask you how you got, because you said you were looking at a band thing, so which made me think band. How did you get started playing the bassoon?
Oh, well, nothing to do with band at all, actually. I was only reading band materials because I happened to I did a minor in music education when I was in music school, mostly because I wanted to do I just wanted to do the technique classes where you learn different instruments, and the only way I would be allowed to do them was if I had a minor. So that was how I ended up, like, very tangentially involved in wind band stuff. But no, I got started in music because my family is musical. So I did Suzuki violin starting from when I was 5 or so. I started bassoon mostly because, I mean, I had quit violin, and I didn't enjoy playing violin in an orchestra very much. I found it very boring. And I mostly started playing bassoon because it seemed like something where you probably didn't actually have to be that good at it, and you'd still get into youth orchestra. Whereas if you live in Toronto, where there are a lot of really, really excellent young violin players, you have to be pretty darn good to get into a youth orchestra, an interesting youth orchestra and violin. So that was most of my motivation for picking up the bassoon. My impression of that situation was entirely accurate. So I ended up having a lot of opportunities on bassoon that I wouldn't have had probably on any other instrument, which probably was the reason that I kept doing it, was that things just kept happening. I mostly auditioned for music school because I was playing in the Toronto Symphony Youth Orchestra, and all my friends in the youth orchestra were auditioning for music school. So I did too.
That's not a bad reason. That, in fact, I think that's a common reason why people apply for music school. Is, well, my friends are doing it, and I like hanging out with them. And you could do a lot worse than learn music in school. Well,
I think that's probably common for, I don't think this is the only career where, when you are around people who do it, it's an option. And when you're around other young people who are aiming at that, then it seems like a reasonable thing to aim for.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So where did you actually study?
And I went to McGill.
You went to McGill. So are you obviously speak, if you're listening to French CBC, you obviously speak French as well as English. Is that right? Are you bilingual?
Yeah, I did French immersion in Ontario High School. I don't even know if I don't think the particular program I did even exists anymore, but starting in grade 4, my school was pretty much all in French from grade 4 to 8, and then like some classes in French through high school.
Okay. So you went to McGill. How many years did you spend in university?
Sorry, can you say that again? You cut out for a bit.
Oh, sorry. How many years did you spend in university?
4. Just one degree, and I had several false starts in terms of wanting to do a master's degree or something after that, and like each time I think at least 3 times I applied to a program and got in and was all ready, and then something stopped me for some reason. Like either I got another opportunity or I just wasn't feeling it, or so yeah, just the one.
Okay, no, that's okay. It's just part of the reason we do these conversations is to let our students know what it's like to be what is it like to be a professional musician? Because I think lots of kids go into public school education or elementary or high school teachers because they've seen those people working in front of them their whole lives, right? And so they may see if they have a lesson teacher, if they're taking bassoon or oboe or piano or singing or something, they see that person but they only see them 1 hour a week. And so part of my, like, so every time I ask, like, what did you do in school? Like, how many years did you have to go? And some people go 4, like you did. Some people like, yeah, I kind of dropped out. I didn't go to music school. I didn't do a music degree, which was Carly's answer a few weeks ago, is that she actually left music for a while and then came back to it after her bachelor degree. And so it's just, I just want to make sure that we have that sense of, like, you can do a little bit of a music degree, you can do not a music degree, you can do like doctoral studies if you want to, but you can still end up as a musician. Like, there's different, yeah. So that's partly why I asked that. So when you finished, what happened when you finished your degree at McGill? So you said that you had a couple false starts at master's degrees, and then, so what kept happening that you didn't end up going to do that?
The first thing that happened was that I got a leave replacement season as second bassoon of the Thunder Bay Symphony, and that was my first year. Like, I think immediately after McGill, I was planning on doing, I think the particular thing I was planning on doing was a degree in or a certificate in chamber music at Laurier. My partner was in Kitchener at the time, so I was gonna go back to Ontario and live in Kitchener. And then I got this thing in Thunder Bay that was a year long, and that was great. I actually just did a master class for the Thunder Bay Youth Orchestra last week over Zoom. I have a lot of affection for the city of Thunder Bay. I'd love to go back there. The orchestra is very small, but it's a really tight-knit community. It was a great, that was such a great experience to play there, because it was really a crash course in that type of orchestra, I think, because when you're a student, you think of, what is an orchestra? I grew up in Toronto, thinking of the Toronto Symphony. I went to McGill, and of course my teacher was in the OSM. And of course, that obviously there are many, many orchestras, especially in Canada, that are not of that size. And in fact, there are only 3 or 4 that are of that size. But realizing, like, up close and personal, that actually there are so many of these organizations that are working, having full-time musicians, working in places that you don't really hear about there being orchestras, and also doing things that I would have had no idea that they were doing. Something that the Thunder Bay Symphony does is they go on 2 tours each year, and they just call them Tour East and Tour West, where get in a bus and drive to all of these very small communities in Northern Ontario that certainly would have no access to live orchestral music if the Thunder Bay Symphony weren't getting on a bus and bringing it to them. And so getting to see all of those places, and like really like being able to look at a map of that area of Northern Ontario and I guess Eastern Manitoba was really valuable to me, and realizing how many people there are there who they think it's really cool when suddenly a symphony orchestra shows up in their town.
That's awesome. I heard somebody's talking, I heard a podcast a while back, and he was saying, like, you have to think about, 100, 200, 150 years ago, if the Beethoven, like if an orchestra is playing a Beethoven symphony, that will likely be the only time that community ever hears that symphony. So that reminds me, I mean, Northern Ontario, they obviously have internet and they have phones, and so they will have heard they may have heard the stuff you're playing before, but you're right, it might be the only time they see an orchestra live, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. And cool. That's very cool. So, okay, so you played for Thunder Bay, and then what happened after that?
After Thunder Bay, then I moved back to Toronto for a year. I was planning on doing a master's degree at U of T. I ended up deciding not to. The teacher that I was going to do that degree with encouraged me not to, actually, which is very nice of him, because it wasn't, I don't think I would have enjoyed it. And then I actually applied and was accepted and almost went to paramedic school. I even moved I did that in Kitchener. Ended up moving to Kitchener. I got very into gymnastics. I did gymnastics recreationally as a kid, and I always had kind of the idea that I wanted to go back, and I I went back to gymnastics with a particular skill in mind that I'd never been able to get as a kid, thinking as soon as I get a kip, then I'll just be happy and I can quit gymnastics. That is not what happened. I'm still doing gymnastics. I did several coaching courses. I ended up coaching gymnastics in Kitchener for a while. And then I did an audition for and received an offer for the Canadian Armed Forces band. They don't tell you officially which band you would have been, which band you're in, because it's, you know, this whole process of applying to the Army and whatever, but unofficially, I think I was intended to be assigned to the band in Ottawa. And then I got the job in Regina instead.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. So, okay. So with the job in Regina, what does a pre-pandemic, or yeah, let's go pre-pandemic. What did a typical workday look like for you before the pandemic started?
Well, I guess one of the features of orchestral music as a career is that the schedule is very irregular, which I knew and expected because my mom is a professional orchestral musician, and that was, when growing up, that was just, I didn't realize that most people went to work from these hours and came home at the same time. That didn't even occur to me. So, but we do have some different types of concerts generally have similar kinds of schedules. So it depends. If it's an RSCP week, if it's a government house week, then generally we'll be working in the morning and afternoon. If it's a Masterworks week, then that's when the musicians who are part-time and often have day jobs come in. So those rehearsals are in the evening. And so sometimes during Masterworks week, we also have RSCP stuff during the day, but often we actually do have most of the day off until the rehearsal in the evening. So,
okay. So with bassoon, do you spend a lot of time practicing still?
Yes. And well, one of the things that's specific to bassoon and oboe, I suppose, is that your practicing time is partly practicing time and partly reed making time. And I think everyone kind of has a different balance of how much time they spend practicing versus how much time you spend reed making. And this is something that's not entirely true. There's a bassoonist of my acquaintance who likes to say that if you have a good reed, you don't need to practice. That's not true, but it has a grain of truth in it, in that there is kind of this balancing act of like, you can practice something really hard, but if you're practicing on a reed that just isn't up to the job, that time is completely wasted, because as soon as you get a reed that is up to the job, it's going to be easy. So you might as well just stop and put your time into working on your reed making. And the thing about reed making is that it's not like, you know, it's not like practicing something where you just need to sit down and try really hard and it'll work, right? Like cane is a vegetable. Some of it's good and some of it's bad. Good reed making means consistently putting in enough time and working on enough reeds that you kind of have this pipeline going where you are able, psychologically almost, you have the capability to say, this reed is okay and I've put time into it, but I'm still going to throw it out because it's just not good enough, which is really hard, especially when you made it with your hands and you're kind of like, oh, maybe I will need it. You know, maybe I could give it to someone else. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's my fault. It's not, just throw it out.
Wow. You know what? That had never occurred to me. Cause you're like so the bassoon, not the reed part, but the bassoon is like, it's like fit, like that part is fixed, right? Like you're not changing the keys on it, and you're not changing the holes, right, and that kind of thing all the time, right? But you're right, the reed, especially because it's a double reed, the reed plays a huge part in that. And that had not occurred to me, that you would spend that much time working on reeds. Wow. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so which I don't know if this leads me to my next question or not, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So what do you know now about being a full-time musician that you wish you had known when you were younger? I don't know if you did you dream of becoming a full-time musician?
No, well, no, not really. Not when I was a kid. But I mean, I would probably have to say not much. But that's like very particular to my situation, which is that my mom was doing, well, the exact job I have now, but much more intense than my job. So probably nothing. I mean, I guess I would say maybe like what I mentioned about my experience in Thunder Bay, and to some extent my experience here in Regina, which is, you know, not every orchestra is the Toronto Symphony. And there are aspects, particularly actually to this job in Regina, that I would not get in other places. The aspect of the RSCP programming our own season is very unusual. Just the idea of an orchestral musician being able to some extent choose what they play is almost unique. And that's a feature that I think I would really miss if I were to go anywhere else. So yeah, maybe just the variety of what you can find in places that aren't major centers.
Interesting. Variety is a good thing in a job, I think. So that, yeah, there are things to recommend smaller orchestras like the Regina Symphony, and as you said, Thunder Bay Symphony.
I mean, I guess I think part of what recommends this job so highly is just the chamber music aspect. And certainly, you know, most musicians who play in large symphonies also have chamber music careers on the side, because I think everyone kind of has this idea that you can't go through life never choosing the music you play. You're gonna, as a musician, you're probably gonna end up with at least a few opinions about what you want to play. And if you have the opportunity, you'll want to put those into practice.
Yeah, I know lots of musicians who have lots of opinions about what they would like to play. So that does make sense. So just thinking back about, so you went from McGill to Thunder Bay and thinking you were going to do this and this. So did you, because I will say, coming out of university, I kind of followed a path, and I used to always say I fell into my first career. Did you choose to become a professional musician, or was it something, it was just where you landed at the moment?
I think I chose it at the moment I decided to go to McGill. Like I was very clear about, there's kind of only one career path that doing a degree in bassoon performance prepares you for.
Yeah.
So I was pretty clear about the fact that I wasn't really going to be qualified for anything else. So I at least better make a good attempt at this one. I did, like, for the first couple years of my degree, I was very involved in a thing called the Ontario Student Classics Conference when I was in high school, which is a couple days at Brock University where there are all sorts of competitions and activities to do with classical, like Latin and Greek. And so for the first few years of my degree, I was thinking of maybe getting a minor in classics. And I found it very difficult, I guess. I did a couple courses, but I found that the amount of time that I needed to invest just in practicing and just in being in the music school and getting to know what I was supposed to be doing there kind of precluded that. So I ended up, I would say, like, there was actually a very specific moment where I was kind of choosing, having started this music degree, and I was thinking, oh, you know, I don't know if this is right for me, blah, blah, blah. And I think it was in my second year, I had signed up for all these other kind of extraneous courses and was really struggling both in those courses and in music. And I came back to the practice hallway at McGill, and I was standing by my locker, like trying to convince myself to practice. And a horn player, a master's student named Michelle Jenkins, I think she's a freelancer in LA now, came up to me and said, you know, what's wrong? And I was explaining all this, you know, I don't have time to do this, and I want to do all these things, and I don't have enough time to practice. And am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Sure.
Can I quote what you said to me? And she just looked at me like I was so dumb. And she said, drop that shit, and walked away. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm quitting the other stuff and I'm giving this a good go. And I did. So I did, like, when I graduated, I had the idea that, you know, maybe if this didn't work, I mean, like I said, I applied for paramedic school and I was really interested in doing that. But I did, I think, have the idea of like, I'm giving this a try, and this is the main focus.
Cool. So, okay, so we've got about 6 minutes left, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to ask, beyond learning to play the bassoon and make reeds, because that's part of it, beyond learning to play bassoon and make reeds, are there other skills that you have needed to be the musician that you are today?
I think the main skill is managing fear. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but I think this is common of students that I've encountered too, that, I mean, it's almost like trite to say that like performance anxiety is a problem for performers. But I think that it's such an all-encompassing problem almost. And I think for many years, that was like the main aspect of like preparing for a performance, was like, the question isn't whether or not you can play it. The question is whether you're gonna run screaming naked into the woods at some point, because this is gonna drive you nuts. And so, yeah, I guess like, because there's maybe an interplay between specific techniques for managing performance anxiety and the kind of general philosophy that those techniques might point you to. And I think both of those things were like a major focus for me when I was in school, because it was clear that I was not going to make it through in any way unless that was a major focus.
Interesting. Okay. I hadn't thought about, anyway, I hadn't thought of that, but I know lots of our students really struggle with getting up and standing up and performing in front of people. And that's, I think at the conservatory, that's one of the reasons we run our recital program as often, like it's like almost weekly that we have recitals, because we want to give kids the opportunity to get up and perform in front of people and make mistakes and realize that it's going to be okay, that the world is not going to end if they make a mistake in their piece, or if they, but I think that that's part of why we do it, beyond just the experience. But I hadn't thought about it as a skill that you could actually work on with performance anxiety. So that's interesting.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, the entire, there's kind of a whole industry, right, of performance psychology as applied to sports. And one of the things that was really kind of popular, at least in the program that I went through, was applying that to music, and kind of the idea that like, in a way, we're behind the curve in terms of adopting this kind of stuff into our general practice. And that was really reassuring to me, because it was a realization that like, not only am I not the only person who's convinced they're going to die every time they step out onto a stage, but actually like there's an entire area of research, an entire industry, people who specialize in this as their jobs, that is predicated on the idea that like, not only am I not the only person, this happens to everyone, and it's a part of the skill set. So yeah, I think like telling students that this information exists is really important. I think there's also, I mean, you can go too far. There's a tendency, I think, of musicians to not talk about being nervous, especially like around, like, you know, you'll never see someone like coming up to someone else backstage and talking about how they're nervous. I think there's probably I kind of understand the reason for that. I always think of this phrase, I think from Infinite Jest, sometimes words that are meant to express actually invoke. And I think that's always stuck in my brain as the reason that we don't tell each other like, hey, how are you doing tonight? I'm terrified for this concert. How about you? We don't tend to say that. But in general, in a teaching context, I think it's important to say that sometimes.
It might be a societal thing too, because I think there are times, but it's not just music, but there are times when people go into work and are terrified of what they're about to do, but don't say it. And yeah, I've often thought there are quite a few lessons we could take from sports and apply to music, and we haven't. But there is some, you're right, there's some solid research out there around sports and performance and even probably learning that we could use that we just haven't tapped into yet. Yeah. Okay, so let's see, how are we doing now? We're just about at the end of time. Is there anything else I haven't asked about that you want to tell us about? Or any other opinions? No. See, we covered it all. We covered it all. Okay. In that case, I'm going to say thank you very much for being with us today. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll open it up to questions for anybody else that has questions.